where there's a certain amount of resource, be it food or any other kind. For that, if one person wants to live a more lavish or comfortable life, they'd have to take those resources from someone else. And that's mostly it for what I know.
Okay. Manal.
So adding to what Taha said, it's based on this paper by Garrett Hardin, in which he gives this metaphor of a common field and sheep who are grazing on the field, and he basically says that every farmer who is grazing his sheep will do it according to what he thinks is his consumption. So he will do it according to what he thinks is better for him without considering the needs of the larger society. So he basically said that this kind of thinking, where we only pursue our personal gains rather than looking at the larger picture, leads to overconsumption of natural resources. So in this case, it would be overconsumption of the grass or whatever the sheep are feeding on. But it can also apply to other natural resources like water or fuel or things like that.
Right. So those who have raised their hands, I would ask them to speak if they want to add on to what Taha and Manal have already said. Rafi, do you want to say something that hasn't been mentioned before?
Hello, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
My internet's being a little unstable.
It's okay. Should I ask someone else to speak before you? Can I ask Hamad?
Yes.
Hamad, you can go first.
Yeah, ma'am. So most of it is almost covered by my fellows. So what I understood from the internet is that the tragedy of commons is the unregulated use of the natural resources. In this process, people forget about the collective welfare of the society, and they just focus on their parochial self-interest. So, for example, water is a natural resource. Sometimes people use it as use it in a way or waste it. So one day it's going to deplete, or it will result in its scarcity. So we are in a way contributing to its scarcity just to fulfill our self-interest. So that's what I understood from the internet.
Right. Okay. So I think now I'm going to move on to the next one, and raise your hands if you want to speak about anything relating to that. The article that I shared was by people who had proposed the IPAT equation. And this article was written way after they had proposed the equation. I just want you to tell your fellows what was your feel from the people who had proposed the IPAT equation for environmental management after, I think, 3 or 4 decades. What did they feel and what did they think about environmental mismanagement? Yes, Rafa, you can go first this time.
Okay, so from the article that they wrote, I understood that they had a lot of emphasis on the fact that only a change in technology cannot solve our issue right now. We need to have a change in, let's say, values, because population or affluence say बहुत everlasting effects हो रहे हैं, and I thought it was like really a lot about psychology, as they said that there were like a lot of psychological factors which made people ignore something like overpopulation or overconsumption, and that's what I got from them.
Right. So I think they just stuck on to what they had proposed already. They said we still stick to what we had said then, and it's everything to do with the population increase and the affluence in consumption and all of that. Neha.
I think they proposed more of a radical change as opposed to organic change, because the main issues that they highlighted, being overpopulation and overconsumption, the reason that they're neglected so much is because of ideologies such as economic ideologies, but also religious ideologies, which are used as scapegoats, for which what they're proposing is basically a restructuring of how society functions.
Right. Thank you, Neha. Hassan Ahmed.
So, one thing that they pointed out was the fact that small changes, something like, slightly more efficient cars or something, is going to help in the short term. But as long as we don't control overpopulation or overconsumption, then this trend is going to just get worse, anyways. And also the fact that businesses find it disadvantageous to stop this kind of thing because it's profitable to them. The more people consume, the more they sell, and it's better for them. So those in power wouldn't actually want this problem to be solved.
Exactly. So I think one thing that people like me who speak a lot about individual actions also at times remind ourselves is the fact that there are top 100 corporations that are responsible for most of the pollution that is present in this environment today. So yes, radical changes are needed by everybody, but those corporations who are majorly responsible for the pollution also need to take action. And I think this is something that we need to remind ourselves time and time again. But then every individual is a corporate in a way, because if every individual reacts or acts the way that corporations act, then most probably the impacts would be much, much higher. Who should I take next? Aman. Aman, can you hear me? Aman, can you say something so that I know if I can hear you?
Okay, so the main concern raised in the article was of overpopulation, at how even with the latest technologies, there is going to be a crisis because of overpopulation. And the example given really like shows how it is going to affect, like having the efficient cars are going to be worst even if there is a greater number of them. So even with our advanced technologies, if we don't take this the problem of overpopulation seriously, so it is going to have numerous effects on our planet, and at the end we are going to leave a planet in a state that it is no longer be able to help us to survive. So there is a great need to look up.
Thank you, Aman. This is why I think in the first lecture I asked whoever's working with the solar panel, I'm sorry I've forgotten your name. Solar panels are carbon emission, like they're zero carbon emission technology. They're renewable. So of course the input that's coming in is clean, the output is clean, but they're still, they're not zero pollution industry. They're still a pollution industry. And the reason for that is that there are all kinds of solar cell manufacturers in the environment, like in the world right now. And at least in my part of the world, those are very cheap, very, shorter shelf life solar cells. And within a year, they stop working, which means that they have now become a solid waste that needs to be taken care of. And we don't have proper landfills there. So how do we take care of those kind of problems in the environment? I just want to quickly jump to the next article. And those of you who have raised your hands, I'm sorry that I did not ask you to speak. Can we just jump to the article on human ecology and what Jerry Martin said in there, which is kind of the connection between ecosystem or science and social system. Adeen. Adeen has.
I had a question related to the last article about the iPad point, that they were like continuously saying that we need to control the population because it was a major factor because of the first problem. But I want to ask that aren't we beyond the point that that if we even control the population, it's still the current population is enough to deplete all the resources.
Yeah. So I think that's the
So
kind of
there's
questions that I wanted you to ask as well. So thank you for bringing that up. And this is where I need to insert a term for you, which is called critical thinking. And I got to know this word very, very late in my academic career. And the reason for that was every time we read something from someone, and especially these articles that I gave you, they were written by the people who had proposed something and that the world was quoting and overquoting over time. And a lot of concepts were built on this. Could we still question a lot of things that they said? I think that's where critical thinking comes in, but critical thinking should come from a space of knowledge and space of research rather than I know everything or I have the right to just raise questions at anybody who's doing something. So whatever you're doing, whatever we are studying, even whatever I am saying may not be 100% correct or may not be one way, maybe one way of looking at things. How you look at it, how you question it, how you analyze it is your way of looking at things. But make sure that you read enough, you educate yourselves enough before you you criticize somebody or you ask a question, that kind of question. And I think you're very right that if they speak about the fact that it's only population and we need to control the population, but the existing population is over exploiting the resources, which is something that we discussed in the previous slide indirectly as well, is that the kind of lifestyles that we're living right now, we already need so many planets to live. Like one planet is not enough for us. So how can we, by saying that we're controlling the population in future, justify the fact that already we are overexploiting the resources? So those kinds of things. Connection between social systems and economic systems. Fateh, have you already, if you have not spoken already, please only then raise your hands.
No, I haven't spoken
Okay, Fateh.
earlier. Yeah, so I read the article too, and while certainly controlling overpopulation and more greener technologies will assist in at least mitigating environmental problems, I think that biggest the biggest like thing which enables this climate change and all these environmental problems is the horrendous amounts of overconsumption and overexploitation of resources that is taking place. I actually have some facts and figures for this. Yes, so like day before yesterday, I was reading an article in The Guardian, the British newspaper, and it contained a report from Oxfam, this international charity. And according to that report, the top 1% of the wealthiest people in the world have as much CO2 emissions as the bottom 50 as the poorest 50% of the population.
Yeah.
So I think that our essential focus should be on controlling the overconsumption and overexploitation of resources rather than focusing as much on overpopulation.
Right. Okay, I think I'm going to have to stop here because we also need to start our next lecture. Apologies to those who could not speak. I'll give you a chance in the next questions whenever they pop up. Right. So today, my first, the first point that I had, like I was thinking about what to discuss next, whether it should be the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, or the atmosphere. And then I decided that no, it has to be the biosphere because we are a part of the biosphere. And I think that if I start with this, a lot of the things that we will study in future will make sense to you, I hope. And so with the biosphere, I kind of want to discuss what the major components of an ecosystem are. We discussed the energy flows last time. I just want to build on that and see how energy flows and material flows in the environment. And we will speak about the productivity of those activities in the environment. And then in the biosphere, the most important thing is the life that exists on it, and that's the biodiversity. So we'll look at the biodiversity. And then between all of this, we will use some case studies to thank our natural capital for the natural services or the ecosystem services that they do for us. So I wanted to start with this case study, and the reason to start with it was so that we can have a simpler explanation of what I'm trying to say in this particular presentation. Amphibians are very important, and if you have grown in a particular environment where you saw smaller insects or bigger birds or other animals around you, just imagine for a split second how many of those have disappeared, or how many of those are vanishing, or how many of those are getting fewer in numbers. When I was growing up in Gilgit, all of our streams were filled with these frogs, and it was just a bioindicator species for how healthy that environment was. At the time, we didn't know what it was, but we would see so many of them. So the water was always filled with tadpoles. And then now, if you look at the global reports on biodiversity, they tell you that the number of amphibians in the environment is vanishing. It's going down. And I've shared some figures, but could you think of a few things that you think might have caused for the numbers to go down if you've also lived in areas where you think that the number has gone down? Can you think of anything? Like the first thing I can think of is the change in landscape and more construction and the change in their habitat. Someone who hasn't spoken before, Daniel.
One of the reasons could be that pesticides are washing into the water and they're creating a harmful environment for these creatures.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, Adi.
Yes, ma'am. Urbanization could also be a factor in like the extinction of the amphibians.
Yeah, Azhan, a hardcore chemistry point that you want to put?
So basically, I would like to emphasize the depletion of ozone layer that we are facing right now because of the human impact. So it could be a one reason that UV lights are coming straight to our Earth, or maybe the animals could not sustain that rays. Like just like we humans have faced trouble regarding.
Exactly. So I think that's definitely one of the reasons why the exposure to the UV has caused reduction in their numbers. Nadia.
Ma'am, I feel like hunting is a hobby or in leisure time is another reason some animals are vanishing. For example, the chakor in our north is its number is going down because people are hunting them, and there is no regulation. I mean, there is, but people are doing it illegally, and that's why the number is going down.
Yeah, that is very correct. Atka, do you want to say anything? I have to go back to the previous slide now. Atka.
I have a question. I did not understand how the layer, the UV, the ozone layer the someone was talking about, how that affects their existence.
Yeah,
It's
so
unclear.
climate change,
Yeah.
or the change in ozone layer, or the way sun and the sunlight's infiltrating into the planet, it has impacted a lot of biodiversity. And again, like those are the things, those are the connections that we need to make, which we otherwise do not make. So for example, you must have heard people putting on a lot of like sunblocks with a lot of SPF, right? You put in a sun protection factor of 40, 50 because you know that UV rays are passing through that layer and they're entering your skin and they're carcinogenic. But we are a very, what should I say? We have the ability to adapt to the climate way better than many other organisms because we're kind of in charge of what we're doing. For these, as I've mentioned somewhere, they don't have hair, they don't have feather, they don't have scales, a lot of things that these other animals have that protect them from harsher environments. They have a very light skin, and their eggs are eggs. Their eggs don't have shells, which means that even at that egg stage, if UV hits them, it could damage their egg and therefore their population could decrease. So yeah, like there are many ways in which UV impacts them, and the most important is that they have a very fine skin and it can easily absorb pesticides. It can easily be damaged by the UV, and that's why ozone layer and the damage in ozone layer can impact their growth. So of course, when I looked up the reasons why the amphibians are vanishing from the environment, there were a lot of them, but some of the major causes are, I've listed them here, which is that their habitat, which is their home, their environment where they grew, they're either we're completely losing them or we have fragmented them. So we don't have it over a huge area. And maybe we've restricted them to one part of their habitat and another part which is on the other side. So they don't get to live together and thrive. That our droughts have prolonged. You know that they're, although as amphibians, they can live on land once they're adults. When they're young, they need to live in water. So if water is decreased, if there are droughts, if there's a lot of construction and now there's no water to be found in the area where they lived, they will probably also vanish. Similarly, increase in the UV radiation because of the damage in the ozone layer or ozone layer thinning. Parasites, and you will not believe it, but people in France and in a lot of other places, people use their legs as delicacies in their food. And that's why overhunting is also one of the reasons for them to vanish. And diseases, we in the recent times know how diseases can impact not just these very small, harmless animals, but also animals as powerful as us. So they are another reason. And then non-native species introduction. This is something that we'll discuss later, but I just wanted to make a list of things that are contributing to these species extinction or even their vanishing or their threatening from the environment. I now want to discuss, because like I said, I want you to go back to the basics and understand what I want to talk about. I wanted to start with the major components of an ecosystem, and they are the atom. So everything, all life on planet starts with a single atom. And if we take a smaller molecule like water or another smaller molecule that we discussed in the previous slide, like carbon dioxide, then it is made of either a carbon and oxygen atom, if it's carbon dioxide, and a hydrogen and oxygen atom if we're talking about water. But it's basically the simplest chemical form of life on the planet, as well as the inorganics, not just life, but other forms of material that's found on the planet. This is the basic building block of that. And a lot of these molecules, when these atoms combine together, they form a molecule, and then certain kinds of molecules combine together to form a cell. Bisma, do you have a question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I just wanted to add regarding the point where you made about how amphibian lives are vanishing. So there was an example in the reading. Uh, it said something about the marinara disease, where mercury was used for industrial processes, and Japan has a region called Marinara, I think, or I don't know.
Minamata.
Yeah, Minamata. Yeah, Minamata. And they basically the industrial workers dumped mercury waste into the coastal waters, and they didn't realize how toxic it was, and it just impacted like the fish a lot, and they couldn't eat fish for years or something like that, of that sort.
Yes.
So that was pretty.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Bisma, because I think there's another thing that we need to mention. Last time I mentioned a city in the US. Japan's also another classic example of how you can completely contaminate your environment, not consider anything, bring in a lot of chemical pollutants into the environment, and then get to clean it yourself and then live a healthier life. So a lot of people who go to Japan now would not believe what kind of life Japan lived before. So it wasn't just Minamata or the mercury pollution. They also had a disease called Itai disease. And there are many other diseases that if you study Japan, you will see, which caused a lot of skin problems for them. And Itai translates to ouch, ouch. And the kind of things that they suffered because they did not take care of their environment, the human then suffered. And of course, human who was directly coming in contact. But they have now remediated their environment. They are now going back to bringing the environment to its original state. But it is true that whoever has managed the environment, they have suffered. And they have only, I think, taken action when the humans suffered a lot. But yeah. Right. So I think most of you already know that cell is the basic unit of life, and that cells combine together to form tissues, tissues combine together to form organs, organs combine together to form an individual or organism, who we also call a species, that's capable of thriving as an individual in the environment. And then that individual, in order to breed, in order to stay or survive on the planet, needs to live with a population of its own kind to breed and to basically reproduce. And then if that population is in contact with other kinds of population, it would be a community. And a lot of communities and the environment that they live in is their ecosystem. So we studied it last time as well, that it's an interaction of an individual with the environment that it lives in. So the biotic and the abiotic components come together, interact, and that particular setup can be called an ecosystem. So these are the major components, I think, of an ecosystem. And every time you look at an ecosystem, whether that's a small ecosystem in the form of a small lake or even a swamp, or if it's a big ocean, you can just go and look at what kind of communities, populations, organisms live there, and how have they developed their organs and tissues such that they live there for a longer time. So their robustness depends on how they grow with time. And I kind of summarized all of that here. I will not go into the details of this in this particular slide, because we're going to be studying microorganisms at some point and the diseases that we have acquired because of living irresponsibly. But I have pasted a slide here which will tell you, in terms of gigatons of carbon, what form of life is most dominant on planet. And you can already guess that it's plant and then so on. But if you have time later, you can just look at this slide and get a sense of how much of these organisms are present in the environment. So biosphere is not just the life on the planet. As I said, that's biodiversity. It is that part of the planet, or that part of Earth, which includes part of air, part of soil, where life is found, or water, where life is found. So that is essentially the biosphere. And I will only speak about biodiversity today because we're going to be looking at hydrosphere and lithosphere in our later slides as well. But biosphere essentially refers not only just to life, but to the air that life breathes, the water in which life is living, and the soil from which it's getting its nutrients. And in all of those spheres, we call them the 4 environmental spheres. In all of those spheres, a lot of things are happening, that nutrient cycling is happening, chemicals are recycling into the environment, but also these spheres interact with each other, and that interaction is important. And they are dependent directly or indirectly upon each other for survival. And biosphere specifically depends on all of these spheres for life to proceed on the planet. Last time we discussed decomposers, and I think I discussed it very simply. In this slide, before we jump on to the next energy and material flow, I just wanted you to have a look at, just wanted you to get a sense of, this is not as simple as the decomposers decompose, that there's an entire kingdom there as well that's doing its job to make sure that all the nutrients return to Earth or are converted in a form that is, again, can be used by other higher life forms on the planet. And with this slide, it sort of shows you the time projection of a simple wood that could be lying somewhere, and how different kind of detritus feeders are responsible for breaking them into smaller pieces until microorganisms can feed on it and then bring back the nutrients into the soil and then provide nutrients for life forms on the planet. Now, this is the slide that I brought in last time, and I was saying that everything in the planet is about flow of energy and flow of material. And sometimes it's about flow of information as well, especially when the human comes in. So, but when we're only talking about other life forms, it's about the flow of energy and it's about the flow of materials. And there are several trophic levels at which these transformations happen. And in each of these at each of these levels, you have the certain weight being assimilated, a lot of heat being wasted in the form of either respiration, which is need of the cell, or feces and decay. So I think it's something that we already discussed in the previous slide, so I wouldn't discuss it in detail here. But just for those who weren't listening like closely or weren't paying close attention, is they just need to know that at all trophic levels or at all levels in the food chain, that is when we move from producers to consumers to eventually decomposers who are lying at the bottom, there would be assimilation of biomass and there would be waste. So they would waste something in the form of feces or excreta from their bodies, whether it's a plant or an animal. And also they would waste some heat or some energy during those processes. But some of it would be in the form of respiration, where they're actually utilizing that heat for their activities, for their bodily function. And I spoke about biomass. We're eating biomass. We are biomass. Plants are biomass. So all of this bio in the form of mass or in the form of matter is essentially biomass. And Hassan, do you have a question?
Yeah, ma'am. Can you please give an example that this chart explains, like how each and every process is passed from the part one, then second, third, and fourth, and so on?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, there are multiple ways in which we can explain it. So if you bear with me for another slide or two, we will get there because I've put a visual presentation as well as some figures that will explain what I mean by this. So I said that the process where I've written an A is basically assimilation, right? That something's being assimilated or made a part of the next step. Could be in the form of meat, fat, whatever, and then so on. And one thing that we need to know, or at this point, and we already can see it from the figure, is that as you go up in the trophic level, which is from autotrophs to secondary carnivores, it's not energy efficient, right? There was a certain amount of solar energy that came to the producer or the autotroph, but by the time it went to the carnivore, a lot of energy had already been dissipated or wasted or lost, however you want to say it. But this is not an energy efficient process. And people use several terms to coin it because you would be coming across readings where this phenomenon is mentioned. I mentioned those words. People speak of it as ecological efficiency. Some speak of it as energy pyramid. But these terms are interchangeable and you'd see them in certain articles. And with the pyramid that I've made, it's a rough pyramid. I just wanted you to know that what I mean by the energy pyramid is that as you move up the trophic level, the energy or the amount of energy that's stored or present or transferred is less. And therefore, the process is inefficient. And there can be multiple ways to look at it, but this case study, which is often quoted from the 1961, is of a lake where they basically used a shallow pond to study all of these phenomena. And they studied the productivity, which is how much biomass or how much weight is assimilated per day. They studied how much biomass is produced per meter square. And then they also studied the number of individuals present in a certain area. So it was presented in the form of an energy graph, but because I wanted you to think about this yourself, I just converted it into a table, which shows that at the producer level, everything will be high, whether it's the productivity. So if I ask you whether lion is more productive in terms of biomass accumulation or plant is, it would be easy for you to guess from the table that a plant is more efficient or more productive compared to a carnivore. And similarly, for biomass accumulation, the producer would accumulate more compared to a secondary carnivore. And if you look at the numbers as well, like plants are so diverse. If you just look around yourself, there's so many of them around you, and their number is also higher around you as well. But as you move up the trophic levels, you would see reduced number of herbivores, then carnivores or omnivores like us, and then finally the secondary carnivores, which I think I said last time that the snow leopards have just gone down and down. They're primary or secondary carnivores. And yeah, Rafe, you have a question.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask, जो plants का biomass है, that's the food they produce?
It's the food they accumulate or assimilate. Yeah, so it's basically the weight. Like the dry weight, not the wet weight. Azhan.
Yes, ma'am. So basically, could you please share the DOI number or the hyperlink instead of writing just source Whitaker? It will make easy for like refer back to the paper that you are talking.
Okay, I will remember to share the paper with you because I didn't think you'd want to read that. But if you do, I will share the paper with you. Nadia.
Ma'am, could you please explain the productivity that is mentioned here? Like it's going down. I mean, what is productivity here?
Yeah, so productivity is how much. So we looked at the previous slide in which we saw that solar energy is being transferred to the first trophic level, where solar energy is utilized for production of food. And we saw that since that is the first step, that's where most of the energy comes in, and that's where food is produced. The producers are producing food. So automatically, a plant is more productive than a secondary carnivore. And how I would like you to think about this is that they are producing food and we are using their food to then become a part of our body, and when we assimilate it we produce so much more waste, and we use a lot of other activities. There is a concept in the coming slides as well, but just think of it as numbers, as how much energy is coming from the sun that is utilized by the plants to grow crops, and then also think of how quickly plants are produced. So if you have a farm, just think of how many times in one season can you grow potatoes. Also think of how many times in one season can you grow carrots, compared to how many humans would be born in that time, and how quickly they will grow. So I think by biomass productivity, what we mean is the amount that is produced, and mostly it refers to the energy that is accumulated in the organism.
Okay. So that means that is the energy it is going to transfer to the next level.
Yeah, so the energy that it is taking on, and that energy is majorly utilizing for food production. So that production is basically the productivity.
Okay.
Yes, Daniel.
Ma'am, how is the dry mass of a plant physically measured?
Yeah, so there are ways to measure it, and it's entirely scientific. So generally what happens is you either have a reference already of what a dry mass of a typical carrot plant would be, or a typical wood would be, or a typical tree would be, and then you use that as a reference. Sometimes you scientifically go and measure it. So if it's a very small plant, if it's a shrub, if it's a herb, you would go and dry the plants. So I know of people who have used brought plants into the lab, dried them, weighed them, taken multiple samples, and then decided that this would be the dry weight. But mostly people just use like database of numbers that are already present, and then they say this is a typical weight of a dry plant of this height and length and this place, and then that's how, like, and sometimes you can use GIS and other tools as well, where you kind of use the density. So if the satellites are measuring it, you would just use the density or the radiations that are coming up from it or whatever. Like there are multiple ways to do it there as well. But let's say a satellite is just looking at the density or the greens on planet Earth, and then from there it's just using a lot of mathematical models or simulations to tell you what the biomass would be for that particular area. And people would refer to it. If it's a wet biomass, they would tell you it's wet biomass. If it's dry, they will tell you it's dry biomass. Okay, so this figure is basically a very simplistic presentation of what we just discussed in those graphs, that at each trophic level, there would be heat that is lost. and then there is food that's accumulated, and life forms change. And then eventually they're decomposed and brought back into the environment, into the soil. So people asked questions about productivity. I've just put one example here, or just quoted the definitions basically of what gross primary production means. And it, as it says, I don't need to explain it, you can just have a look of how much energy from the sun is now converted into chemical energy or food or whatever you want to call that assimilation during the process of photosynthesis. So let's say the amount of energy from the solar light that is converted into glucose would be your gross primary production. But that is not it would not be passed on to the next trophic level, right? So what basically, that's why they introduced the term net primary production, which means that the producer also needs to live. So if I'm a plant and I'm producing, and then there is a lot of heat and I need to transpire, then some energy will be used in that process, which means that I will respire to transpire some water so that the temperature and the health of the plant can be regulated and that nutrients can be provided. So in that respiration, some of the energy is lost. And then what's left for the producer is called the net primary production. And then that would then go on to the next one. To give this concept, I basically just wanted to look at the same graph that I've presented up, which is think of, forget the autotroph, forget the producer, just think of the secondary carnivore. Let's say we're talking about a snow leopard or something else that's that now has to, we're talking about productivity of a snow leopard. So when we speak about its gross primary production, it's net primary production basically, because gross primary production would be for the plant. Its net primary production would be all the R's of the previous trophic levels. So it would not just be the gross primary production of the plant minus R1, it would be the gross primary production of the plant minus R1, 2, and 3, which means that at all those trophic levels, some energy would be dissipated as to respire, for the cells to respire. And then what comes to the secondary carnivore would be the energy that's left after all of those. And yes, Rafi.
Ma'am, you're saying that to find out the net primary production for secondary carnivore, we just minus all the R's. But that means we're assuming that the net primary production for the autotroph, the herbivore is literally assimilating all of it.
The herbivore is assimilating all of it. I didn't get your question.
My point is that isn't there going to be some productivity lost on each trophic level?
Yeah, so basically like I said, do not look at any definition, any model, any question that I give you as a perfect model to examine something, right? It's just a model. These are the definitions that were built to explain what's going on in the environment, and also to show the energy inefficiencies in nature, and also to understand how biomass is accumulated, and also to see how we can somehow lessen the impact that we create on the environment. So sometimes these concepts are not, they're not important otherwise, like where would you use it in your life? But if you look at, for example, your lifestyle, if you look at why should I eat meat instead of plant, that's when these concepts are more important. So it has very less to do with, of course there are a lot of things that we could keep on adding into it. There would be loss when I say R's, I also mean the F1 and C1. So any life that's lost in the process, any energy that's dissipated in the form of feces or excretory products, they're all a part and parcel of it. What happens at each trophic level, and finally whatever trophic levels next, what they get out of it is much less compared to what was present in the first trophic level. And that's what you need to take into account. And in a natural environment, these things won't matter that much. But if you're farming, if you are creating a farm where you have kept a lot of cows, and therefore there's a lot of methane being produced, and you are a major supplier of meat, and then some of the meat is being wasted, and to do that you're growing a lot of plants, that's when these sorts of equations would make more sense of how much is your impact on the environment. If in order to, the same footprint concepts that we discussed, that if I have X number of cows in a farm, and then if I have land where I grow crops, how do I grow the crops efficiently? And how do I make sure that this entire process is efficient? And that's where these losses would be important. But otherwise, in your day-to-day lives, I'm not sure how much accurate do you want them to be, and whether we should care how accurate they are or not. But these are just for you to get an understanding of many processes that are happening just to get that plate of food in front of us in a table, on a table, right? I'm not sure if I answered your question, Rafi. But that was my take on it. So, and also another thing, the reason why I mentioned the biomass, the productivity, and the individuals is there are multiple ways to look at it as well. Maybe sometimes you're more interested in the number of individuals present, right? Oftentimes from conservation point of view, from animal presence point of view, you are not worried about how much energy they're accumulating. You're more worried about what their number is. And for their number to be greater, you need to have enough producers or autotrophs around them. And so that's what you will think all the time. But in this particular GPP NPP equation, we're just thinking majorly in terms of the energy that is being made available for the next trophic level. And then we're also thinking about environment as a whole and saying, if you want to save energy, if we want these processes to be efficient, what should we do? How should we change our lifestyle? Okay. And because all of those examples that I shared with you, they only showed you that at each trophic level, things are going down. That's not always the case for everything. If you, Azhan, I have a question for you. What's DDT's full scientific name? Okay, you're not listening. Fine. So it's dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, ma'am.
And
could you repeat the question, because वो थोड़ा सा signal late आया.
What does DDT stand for, and what is it used for?
So basically, in chemistry, we will refer it like dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane. If I'm not wrong, but I'm not sure. But I think it's probably dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane.
Yeah. And what is it used for? Do you have any idea? Because it's called major nuance in the environment.
I think it was used in World War II, but I'm not sure specifically where it is used.
It's not a test. It's just because you miss your chemistry, so I thought I'll give you a chance to come in and say something.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not necessary to know each and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So was majorly used as pesticides and insecticides, and of course it has a lot of other uses as well, but we have incrementally use it, just like we do anything that we find useful, we use it incrementally or excessively around us, and then only to find out 10-15 years later that it's actually carcinogenic, or it's actually not useful for us, or that it caused a lot of harm. DDT was one of those chemicals that was used as pesticides, I think, and then something that Visma, I think, already mentioned, that when they used mercury for plastic production and only found out later that it wasn't good for their health. DDT, the same happened with DDT. We excessively used it in our food, only to find out that at each trophic level, it amplifies and it magnifies, so much so that it becomes a danger for anyone who's standing higher at the food chain. So for us who are as omnivores, perhaps next to carnivores, we accumulate a lot of the waste that's in the environment. So the only reason to bring this slide here, although it has no direct relevance to what the discussion is about, is that when we study energy pyramids, when we study a lot of those things, biomass, energy, efficiency, we always see that things are going down, right? The productivity is going down, energy efficiency is going down, ecological efficiency is going down, numbers are going down. But one thing's always going up, and that is pollution. If there is any form of toxic pollutant in one life form and you go up the trophic level, it would amplify. And in this particular case, as it says, it would amplify 10 million times. And it is a carcinogenic, and we know that. So I just wanted to bring it here for your knowledge. Now to the part that I actually wanted to discuss more in today's presentation, and I know I have very little time for it, is the Earth's biodiversity. And by Earth's biodiversity and its importance in the biosphere, as I said, has to do with the life forms eventually have a lot of service to play, and those services we will discuss in a while. But for those life forms or that biodiversity to stay, they have to bring in a lot of innovation in how they adapt in the environment, in how they live where they're living. They have to improve their functional diversity, which means that whether that's nutrient cycling, whether that's adapting to a certain thing, they have to improve that. They have to up. Because the climate change is causing a lot of quick changes into the environment. So they need to make sure that if the temperature suddenly rises, how do the processes of nutrient cycling then get impacted? And ecological diversity, that's also something through which we can measure the biodiversity, which means that different ecosystems allow different kind of microorganisms to grow. And then when they live and interact with each other, then beautiful communities are formed. And we see that in the tropical rainforests and other examples that we often see on TV. And then species diversity, like I said, that because the environment is changing rapidly, every species doesn't look like the other species, and every species, although we hope that entire population would adapt, but species look different from each other. Species have different characteristics because of the genetic diversity. That is the genes that we carry, and the DNAs that we have. And I think I've elaborated it in the next slide a little bit, so you can read it later. The more diverse the genes, the more robust that population would be. And by biodiversity, we only often think of the number and kinds of animals. They don't have, there doesn't need to be a lot of animals and a lot of different kinds in a particular environment. Sometimes it could be just one species and its robustness and its ability to thrive in that particular harsh climate. And so, just also break that down. Yes, Azan.
So, ma'am, when you are referring to diversity, species diversity, so you are referring to the diversity through evolution, right?
When I'm referring to species diversity, I'm referring to what?
So, through the natural process of evolution.
Yeah, for the natural process of evolution and for survival. I think it's now we all know it's a game of survival. It's about what happens and how we live if tomorrow a disease comes, if tomorrow a disaster comes, if tomorrow we see the unseen or we get the unexpected. I think it's more about that now. And those that evolved, they thrived, and those that that weren't built to live in such an environment or were not adaptive enough, like the amphibians, because they only have a thin skin. It's literally proteins, a mixture of proteins. It's sac-like structures. So for them to adapt to all of these chemicals, to all of these viruses and diseases, I think it'd be very difficult for them compared to us, right? Who can also build drugs, who can also do something else to take care of themselves. And I think there is something that we need to discuss regarding that as well. Again, you've already mentioned the concept of evolution. It's not that important here, but if we don't discuss it, I think we would be doing Darwin a disservice, because at that time, at that point in his life, to coin the term evolution and then for it to be evolved into natural selection and to get things like how life is adapting and how biodiversity is thriving and all these beautiful concepts in biology. I just wanted to mention some of the scientists here. But also I wanted to mention that biodiversity right now, because there's so many species that need discovery, right? There's so many species that we haven't discovered yet. There's so many species we haven't named yet. So you go to different sites and they would give you different numbers of how out of so many animals present, only XYZ have been identified. Similarly, for the fossil records, if you look at these scientists, these paleontologists who sit in a natural history museum or are in the field creating fossil records, we see a lot of them in museums outside. But even that is only 1% of the life that has existed before. So I think with this, I just wanted to make a point that, you know, it's huge. This is a different world that once you dive into, you just cannot get yourself out. And that's why I think it was so hard for me to think of exactly what to be taught in this just one lecture for Biosphere, because there's so many things that come into it and not just life. And if I come to life, then what should I focus on? But I think it was more about telling you what services life have, and why should we know about the services that they have, and why should we change the lifestyles that we have. So you mentioned natural selection, it's present in that slide. I just wanted to introduce that it doesn't have to be natural selection, that even as humans, we've done artificial selections, we have crossbreeded different kinds of species, same species, different breeds, and then we've gotten different results. So natural selection and artificial selection through crossbreeding are both happening in our environment, mostly in the case of the domestic animals that we use, but also in the wild as well. And that's what evolution also discusses, that how some animals could be our ancestors, or how, you know, we could have come from one form of life, and because of the changing times and because of our ability to adapt, we certainly and suddenly have become so powerful that we are now in charge, or that anthropocentric approach that a lot of people say in the environment exists. I will not mention genetic engineering here, although I did want to mention it here, because we as humans are now changing a lot of things in order to, for example, improve a plant's ability to fight with a pest, improve a plant's ability to grow quickly, to grow more, or to grow in a certain weather condition that it is not used to. Genetic engineering is happening, but it's such a huge concept that I will leave that here and maybe discuss it later at some point. So I will only give you 1 minute to anyone who can think of how did we become such a powerful species in this entire picture of biodiversity. How do you think did us human become so powerful? Anyone other than Rafi, and anyone other than Fateh as well. Sorry. Okay, no one else wants to raise their hand. Yes, Mansoor.
Yes, so we as a Homo sapiens, we developed cognition, which enabled us to share stories and uh, believe in each other and trust in each other. So what this does, basically we were able to create stories, and we were able to believe in these stories, which led us uh, uh, to form large groups of people, and then we would cooperate with each other. And uh, uh, so what basically happened was that first people lived in small groups, and what cognition did was that people when hunter gatherer societies transformed into agricultural societies, the the power of cooperation developed, and thousands and millions of people then joined together, and then cleared all the other species which were living in other areas. They cleared these out, and they used all of these to their own goods and to the broad use of humans, human development, or basically for the upgrade of human civilization.
Exactly. So that's exactly what happened, Mansoor. And I think the quick and easy answer to this would be Ashraful Makhlukat. We are dominating this because we literally can use our brain so much better than many others can. Sometimes it can go towards the destructive end as well, but mostly because we have used we've used this anthropocentric approach where we are in the center and we're using everything else for our service. And the one thing that has happened us the most is our ability to walk. You know, a lot of other very powerful creatures cannot walk. So our ability to walk, and then I think our grip. because maybe an elephant is more powerful than I can ever be, or maybe an alligator is more powerful than I can ever be, but they cannot carry their lunch boxes and walk for miles, right? So I think the grip, the walk, and then the brain, these are the three things that have, and their proper use has made us one of the most powerful species in the earth. And I already spoke about habitat and niche and these things, so I wouldn't mention them. I wanted to mention a few case studies before we officially end the class, and then I give you the floor. One is that life forms on the planet are changing. For example, Beiji, which is, I think, a Chinese river dolphin said to have gone extincted. And Indus River dolphins found in the Indus River, and because we've damaged its habitat as well, or the place where it lives, and that's why they are endangered. I will just give you a quickly like the definition of what threatened, endangered, and extinct is. Threatened is like level 1, where you know this animal could face threat or is facing threat. Endangered is the second level when it comes to conservation of animals, which is that we say it's gone past threat and they're actually the numbers declining. And extinct or near extinction is when their numbers actually disappearing. So when we said vanishing in the beginning, some of them completely vanished. And that vanishing means extinction. So those that have disappeared, that whose lives have ended for the planet altogether, we call it extinction, even if it's in one part of the world and not in another. So if you have time, I would really encourage you to go to the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species and get yourself acquainted with this, because I think right now this is the most important thing when it comes to biodiversity and international obligation to take care of wildlife and life in general. With biodiversity, I think you need to understand these 3 or 4 things. That species can be native, non-native. How does that impact the environment? They may not impact the environment. A lot of these dogs that we've brought, they're all non-native, but they're hardly doing any damage to the environment. Native, the better, because they have lived in a certain environment. They'll have the ability to thrive better and adapt better to the changes in the environment. And then there are indicator species. Someone asked me last time, I think, about wildlife, and I had given a generic answer to that. A more specific answer to that would be that sometimes, even if the service that the animal is doing is not as obvious as another service that we call the keystone species, if that species doesn't serve you like that, if that species is not your food, if that species doesn't have an evident service, ecosystem service for you, then that species could just be an indicator species. And by indicator species, we mean that it shows you that the environment is healthy. And then it also gives you a warning when its numbers dwindle, it gives you a warning that something's wrong with the environment, right? Or it gives you an early warning of the damage to the environment or the changes to the environment. Whereas keystone species are those that have huge roles, not only in lives of some of forms, but many other lives that are around them. And if their numbers dwindle, then we are in trouble, because a lot of other species that depend on them for survival would also be impacted. And I wanted to use the case of an American alligator who's found in Louisiana and I think Florida and some parts of the US, where it's said to have outlived dinosaurs. They say that they have no natural predator. And who should they be more threatened of? The human beings. So although they have no natural predators, their numbers, they were close to extinction. Their numbers were going down, and they are key stone species in their particular niche in the area that they live. They're a keystone species because they dig gatter holes with their claws, and those gatter holes serves as areas to store water and fresh water. And then a lot of other life forms come and take advantage of it. And that doesn't just include life forms in water, but also birds, and other bigger carnivores. Similarly, they have nesting mounds, which is also used as feeding and breeding site by other animals. They can eat a predatory fish, which keeps the balance of the population in the area where they live, which is mostly wetlands. And then they have the capability to keep the places open, which stops invasive species like trees and shrubs who can grow really fast to come and invade that area. And then again, that it provides an environment for other life forms to live as happily as they can. But knowing humans, they, some of them hunted them because they did not like the alligators. Some hunted them for sport and to show that we're powerful. Others hunted them because of the exotic meat and because we just like the kind of lifestyles that we live. And some for the soft skin that they got from these alligators. And very expensive products were built and shipped all around the world, and their numbers just dwindled. But then now their numbers have increased again. And all of that happened because people were not aware of the fact that these are not just some ugly, dangerous creatures, but a keystone species who has an important service or ecosystem service to provide to the environment. And this awareness needs to pass on to all human beings, that you cannot kill an animal just because you hate it, or because it doesn't do you any direct service, or because it's not pretty enough to be your pet. So I think that's that. With that, I just wanted to tell you that these organisms are important, and I did not use these terms before. Whether native, whether non-native, exotic, from your environment, outside of your environment, invasive, non-invasive, they are an indicator of a healthy environment, and some of them might have very, very good roles to play. So just look around the species that are present all around you, species that you don't see anymore, and look for the services that they do. Just like something that we mentioned for the locust swarm in the last lecture, that the birds population has come down, and that's why we now can only rely on pesticides or insecticides to kill them. So look at all those kinds of services that those harmless life on the planet gives to you, and then kind of thank them for the services that they have. So I don't know how much time do we have. We have some time, so maybe I can ask you to tell me, why should we thank the insects today? Because this is the last slide, and I think most of you know these drives about saving the bee, about bees also vanishing and their importance in our life, and about putting all these wild plants from at least not here, but in Europe, you would see that a lot of pathways, a lot of gardens now have wild plants, because they want the interaction between the wild and the other plants, and because that increases the diversity, but also some of those wild plants attract bees, which are important for life forms to grow. Rafe, can anyone else raise their hands? Because now it's making me worried that other people are not interested to talk, or maybe they're not enjoying it, or maybe they're not even behind their screens. So if this continues to happen, I'll just give you a lot of reading, and I will not teach you anything, and I'll just ask you questions, and I will just pick up individuals to answer questions. Nadia.
Ma'am, we have a lot of these beneficial insects that are very helpful, and they make our lives easy. For example, we can take the example of the silkworm. For example, they give us silk that they can be used to make cloth, as well as we can talk about the honeybee, which gives us the honey. And although we have to compete with them for our food, but in a way or other, they are very helpful for our daily life users. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, Eamon.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ma'am, so I believe certain insects are important as part of biological control in the ecosystem. They may be feeding on other pests and other insects that are generally harmful for us. For example, there are certain pests that attack crops during certain times of the year when seasons change, and I believe some insects feed on those pests that can prevent further damage to crops and our sources of food.
Yeah. Hassan.
So this is something that's relevant to lungs because if you look at the gardens that are around SSC, you might see a lot of dragonflies uh, near like the spraying area. And those are usually very good at controlling mosquito population. And I believe a couple of years ago, LUMS tried to, spread like gas in LUMS to kill mosquitoes. But then these also started killing other insects, and the bio department protested a lot about this. And they said that dragonflies are already natural predators for the mosquitoes, and they're controlling the environment, so you don't need to do this.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you for bringing this point. Iman.
Insects are also very important for pollination. Like one insect like carries the pollen grain and then takes it to another flower. This way plants and fruits can grow, which is important for us.
Yeah. So yes. Anybody else? Iman. Iman, you've spoken. Anybody? Rafe, do you want to speak before I?
They're also like really big element for the decomposition. They're like part of the decomposers. And also in my house, I remember there was this one time जब छिपकलियाँ नहीं आती थी, there were no lizards. And we saying like for a few we were happy, like for a few months actually. We started noticing that all of the other insects are just like doubling everywhere. क्योंकि अब छिपकलियाँ नहीं हैं और उनको खा नहीं रही. And my dad was like, I knew this would happen. So I was like, okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So thank you so much for, I've put some points there as well why I think insects are important and why we should thank all forms of biodiversity around us that do us some service and make sure that their habitats remain. I will not discuss more slides because we are out of time, but I would really want you to look at these home tasks that I've given you. One is for you to, maybe I will give you more reading as Hans mentioned that the readings are simpler. So maybe I'll complicate it a little and give you more scientific readings, especially those from the science background who want that. And for discussion in the next class, I'm going to ask you all, I've presented it in some of the slides. You just need to look at what kinds of biomes exist in Pakistan and how does that make life in Pakistan or biodiversity in Pakistan different from biodiversity in other countries. And then I'm going to give you a writing CP as well, where I am asking you to design an experiment, and it can be any kind of experiment. It doesn't have to be a hardcore scientific experiment, to find a key indicator species or any other species from your locality, wherever you're from, or if you're from a hardcore urban area, maybe you can think of a nearest locality where you can design an experiment to find a key species or maybe a bioindicator species, whatever you want to do. But you have to design an experiment to do that. Is that clear?
Ma'am, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Ma'am, what do you mean by an experiment? Like we have to plan something to find that particular thing, or for example, if I want to find the lizard, so how will I design any experiment to find them? And just give an example so that it can be clear.
Yeah, so I'm saying design an experiment. I'm not saying conduct it. So if it means that you are from Sargodha and you're saying that because of XYZ actions, they're not coming to our homes, so I will go out and I will do this. I'll put a light at certain locations, hoping outside in the house, hoping that they would come there. And then I would use a certain quad to measure the number of lizards that come there. It can be anything, but I don't want to give away too much information because basically designing an experiment, it doesn't have to be a perfect experiment. I just want you to get acquainted with the idea of designing something to find out something, which is basically what scientists do. You identify a problem and then you think of something, and then you need to have some sort of scientific ways to find out the answers. You can even have hypothesis for the answer as well, that I think this is why this is happening. You just need to prove it through your actions, and it doesn't
so
have
at the end Yeah, please carry on.
Doesn't have to be complicated. You can just put a small organogram saying these are the things that I would do. Um, those who have more science background, from them I would expect more scientific interventions. But from others, maybe they can just read and get a grip of how biodiversity is calculated, found out, what kind of experiments are needed. And maybe you can just stick with one of the social things. For example, you can just rely on one of the statistics that are present online and say, I went and I did this and I'm giving away too much information. But basically, I want you to design and think of how this can be done. And not forget about it, forget about its perfection, forget about the results. Just think about the fact that you have to find out a keystone species in your country. And what would you do? Where would you go? What would you do? If you can't go anywhere, what mediums would you use? What numbers would you need? How would you get those numbers? Just think of those. Anybody else before we, anyone, and this includes other participants from WIT as well. If you have any point before I end the lecture, you're more than welcome to say it. Because I think last time Dr. Mahmood wanted to contribute with the locust swarm. I did not welcome him in the lecture, so I missed that. But maybe next time in one of the future lectures, we can allow him to speak. If you don't have more questions, you're more than welcome to email them to me. But if you don't have more questions, then I would, I think, like to end the class here.
Ma'am, do we have to email you the writing assignment, PP, or do we have to paste it on the LMS?
I will put this on the LMS as well, but you're free to do it. I wouldn't mind receiving them because I've created a separate folder for you and it just goes there. So I don't mind any.
Okay.
I'll upload it on the LMS.
Ma'am, is it possible that you share the slide beforehand? In this way, like it will help us to follow up during the lecture and make notes.
Okay. So does the Zoom screen not serve the purpose, or do you want to take notes as this happens?
Yeah, so I thought about like using a PDF version, editable PDF version, and like write on the slides that you are using.
I can do that. So I will just like 2-3 hours before the class, I will upload it on the LMS.
Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz. Allah Hafiz, everyone.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, like, actually, I'm not enrolled in this course yet because I saw the email. I saw your email just right now because, like, last 2 days there was no proper internet in my area, so I didn't like check my emails, like record my emails or check my emails. In which because I have like 20 credit hours right now, so RO didn't enroll me in this course. However, because the reason that I took 20 credit hours because I want a backup. I didn't know on that movement I will be enrolled in this course or not.
Right.
So is this possible to be because there is instructor approval phase in which the instructor approve the enrollment, and then will be an enrollment for a student. So if I email, so can I be enrolled in this course?
So did I send your name ahead already? I did, right?
Yeah, you sent me the email that the RO sent you, and also you sent the lecture slides as well because I was not enrolled in this course.
Right. So you're saying that you're happy to drop one of the other courses and enroll in this one. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I can, or you can send them an email directly saying which one of the courses you want to drop, because they already have they already have my consent on it. So they already have an email that says, I'm happy for you to enroll. And if you inform them that which course you're dropping, I'm sure they will take you in. But if you don't, then you can forward me the email and I will reinstate what I've already said.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Hafiz.
Hafiz.